As viewers of the Angry Video Game Nerd and Cinemassacre's Monster Marathon already will know, the arguably overall most faithful adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula is the 1977 BBC version. But of course, that was made long before the BBC went all in on modern audiences, to the point of on numerous occasions rewriting British history to make it more inclusive, and, lest we forget, turning Doctor Who first into a woman and then black and gay. What would happen if the BBC, in this day and age, were to make a Dracula adaptation for modern audiences? Maybe one co-starring Morfydd Clark of Rings of Power fame. How would that turn out? Well, we actually already know the answer to that, because while underreported, it already happened in 2020. Let's dive into the BBC's current year queer Dracula for modern audiences. January of 2020 saw the release of BBC's 3-episode miniseries Dracula from Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss. Of the two, Moffat is of course the more famous, as he was the second showrunner of the BBC's Doctor Who revival, a series for which he co-wrote a number of episodes with the aforementioned Gatiss. And outside of that, he wrote the script for Steven Spielberg and Peter Jackson's motion capture feature The Adventures of Tintin, and he was the co-creator and co-writer of the contemporary Sherlock Holmes series simply titled Sherlock, which propelled Benedict Cumberbatch into stardom. What most of these projects have in common is that they were radical new takes on existing properties, taking them in wild new directions. The same approach was taken in this retelling of Dracula, and if anything, as we shall see, even more so. As for me, I was aware of the existence of the 2020 BBC Dracula since it came out, but never bothered to check it out when it was released. What prompted me to see it now, when it's on Netflix, and make this Halloween special, was actually the making of our ultimate Nosferatu retrospective, which is up right now on our new channel Midnight's Edge Retrospectives and Classics, alongside our remaster of the original unabridged 1922 Nosferatu. Check that out if you're in the mood for a proper Halloween movie. But getting back on track, how Nosferatu prompted me to check out this BBC version was learning that Dracula's castle in it is the same castle that was used in the original Nosferatu, namely the Orava castle in Slovakia, which is a character in this 3-episode miniseries. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the best characters at that. But let's get into the rest, shall we? This modern reinterpretation stars Danish actor Claes as Dracula, and his Dracula borrows heavily from both of the OG Draculas, Bela Lugosi and Christoper Lee. He is the right fit for this reinterpretation, because as befits the tone, he is hamming it up and chewing the scenery. Since development of this series begun in 2017, just after the Orange Man took office for the first time, Van Helsing is a woman, of course, portrayed by Dolly Wells, and she is very good. Jonathan Heffernan portrays Jonathan Harker, and Morfydd Clark, in whom there is a tempest, portrays his wife Mina Harker. Now, I can't emphasize enough that this is a modern reinterpretation, which is both a strength and a weakness, because sometimes they do go a bit overboard and assumes the audience already are intimately familiar with the source material. For a contrast, take Moffat's earlier work in Doctor Who, or in Sherlock for that matter. Both of those were new spins on existing source material, but for a good while there, they were made in such a way that they were equally accessible to both new audiences that didn't know what had come before, as they were to long-time fans that were surprised by the new twists and turns. Case in point, if you've never read Sherlock Holmes before, or seen any of the earlier movies, you'd still have no problems at all following Moffat's Sherlock. And if you had, you'd be impressed by how much things had changed, but still stayed the same. This version of Dracula, however, kind of assumes that you already are quite familiar with the source material, and if you are, it works, because it goes out of its way to change it, sometimes in rather over-the-top ways, specifically to surprise and confuse those who already know their Dracula. But they go so far over the top in doing this though, that if you're not familiar with the Dracula story already, then I can only imagine that this must feel like some bizarre parody of a property you're not familiar with. And I have the perfect example to illustrate just that. Imagine someone who has never ever seen Doctor Who, and then their first encounter with it is the 1999 comedy relief parody The Curse of the Fatal Death, starring Rowan Atkinson. A parody which you can see right here on YouTube, and fun fact, that was also written by Stephen Moffat. I imagine that someone new to Dracula will get the same experience from watching this 2020 BBC version as someone entirely new to Doctor Who would get from watching The Curse of the Fatal Death. It's not bad, it's actually very cool, but it will help if you have some prior familiarity with the material. If you don't, it's just surreal, as is this Dracula. With that, let's get into it. In episode 1, we meet Jonathan Harker, who has just managed to escape from Castle Dracula, while Dracula himself, off-screen, is preparing to depart for England. From there, the story is told in flashbacks, as the weakened Harker relays to the nuns looking after him the story of how he was sent from England to finalize Count Dracula's acquisition of Carfax Abbey, and initially, Dracula himself appears as an old man, just like in the original novel. Also, like in the original novel, Dracula wants Harker to stay with him for a month, so he may learn the finer details of the English language as well as upper-class customs from him. Yet here is also the first major difference. While drinking the blood of his victims will make Dracula younger, in this series it also enables him to absorb their memories and even their skills, up to and including language skills. So, if this Dracula wants to pick up a new language or any other skill, drinking a bit of blood of someone already knowledgeable in it will suffice plenty. As far as changes go though, there was a far more controversial one. In the weeks prior to the release of the series, there was a rumor based on a leak that Dracula might have an interest in his male victims beyond their blood, let's say. But this was something Moffat instantly shut down, claiming that his Dracula was bi-homicidal, not bisexual, and that those were very different things. Later, it emerged that he wasn't entirely honest when he said that though. As I said, the first episode is mostly told through flashbacks, as Harker relays his story to the nuns looking after him, as he recalls it. And the nun leader, Agatha van Helsing, has a suspicion.
I'm asking Mr. Harker if you had sexual intercourse with Count Dracula.
Obviously, Harker is a married man who is faithful to his wife, so much so that first night in Castle Dracula, he had this most vivid dream of his wife sitting on top of him, riding him. But as it turned out, the only part of that which was a dream was that his wife was ever there. The reality was that even though Dracula evidently likes to, sit on top at the receiving end, Harker had just been turned into one of Dracula's brides. And if he's a misbehaving bride, then he might be turned into an undead and locked into a box, like Dracula's other bride, namely this dude right here. True to the book though, Dracula has 3 brides, and the third one is a woman.
He doesn't know I can get out of the box. Don't tell him.
What?
Though who knows what he does with her, other than feed her babies, which again is taken straight from the book. And the more and more Harker recalls, the worse it gets. And as the nuns and everyone else who encounters him soon will find out, this Dracula is a manic sadist, to the viewer's delight. What I just relayed may sound horrible, and that is by design, as this was obviously meant to shock you and subvert your expectations. In fact, Moffat and Gatiss have gone out of their way to surprise you and come up with twists and turns that you do not see coming. And I will admit that they were successful in this, because by the end of the second episode, I gave up on guessing what might come next. And that is not necessarily a bad thing. Had this been truly awful, I would have had no qualms about spoiling this whole series. But you know what? Like the Doctor Who parody, Curse of the Fatal Death, this thing on its whole is cool enough that I'm not going to do that. Because that is what you have to consider this thing to be, the Dracula version of Curse of the Fatal Death. This isn't a genuine adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. This is like Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein or Mel Brooks' Dracula, Dead and Loving It. Something that doesn't even try to be the real Dracula, but something fun that can sit beside it, like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter or Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. That's what this is, and when you accept that, it is actually pretty cool. So, if you already know your Dracula, if you've seen a few movies that are actually genuine adaptations, there are far worse ways to spend a few hours than watching this. I know I had fun with this version. If you haven't seen any other Draculas before though, don't begin with this one. Then you'd be better off going back to the very beginning and check out our remastered version of the original 1920 Nosferatu, which has a brand new original score, newly translated title cards from the original German, and for the first time since its original release 1 century ago, the correct color tints, at all times reflecting the correct time of day and light conditions, which are kind of a big deal in vampire movies. Have an awesome Halloween, and let me know if you're going to check this out, or if you have, what you thought about it in the comments.